the Wexford campus, we're kind of spoiled because every weekend here we have live teaching. You know this, maybe if you're a guest with us, you don't know this, that every Saturday night the sermon that I might preach or Scott might preach up here goes to all of our other campuses via video. And so tonight I'm actually excited that I don't have to worry about things like cameras in the back of the room that goes out to all these other campuses. I can actually do this. Hey, and not worry about it. So I love the fact that I've got some freedom and flexibility to just talk to Wexford tonight. And can I just celebrate with you what happened here tonight?
Yes.
I mean, my goodness, 7 baptisms here, right? But check this out, all right? 7 here tonight. We're going to have 24 the whole weekend long at all of our services that are happening. And that's just Wexford. All the other campuses are doing baptisms as well. So we have dozens more that are happening across the region of Pittsburgh. That's amazing that we are seeing God changing lives and people are going public with their faith. We need to celebrate what God's been doing in the last few months, that people are taking that stand. Incredible. And then I just want to say personally, man, I am so excited that Bobby Brahms is here. All right? So the fact that he is here is it's gonna lift a weight off of my shoulders. Let me tell you a little bit. If you didn't hear when we introduced Bobby, a few months back, couple months back, let me just tell you what he's gonna do. He's gonna be overseeing our entire family ministry, okay? So he's going to be the leader of all of our 0 all the way up through high school, and he's gonna oversee all of that. He's gonna be shepherding those hundreds of kids and their families, and so that's a big responsibility. But then also he's going to be helping me here at this campus bear the load of what it means to lead 2,500 people. I've been in this role, and I've been doing this sort of just on my own, not in the sense, we obviously have a big staff and all of that, but I haven't had somebody to run beside and to help. And so Bobby, I'm so excited that you're here, man, because well, your family's amazing, man. I'm just stoked that you're here, aren't you? Yeah, I love this guy already. Take him out for coffee. Get to know this guy, okay, everybody? So today, we're in the second part of this series that we've entitled Reckless. So this is the final week of it, and we just kicked it off last week. We're looking at the reckless love that God has for us. And we've been calling out that many of us, we have these interesting perceptions of who God is. And I'm going to say here tonight that I think that many of us have the wrong perception of what the church is supposed to be. So my hope here tonight is to be able to hit kind of a reset button. That's what we did last week on the reckless love of God, who God is. And now tonight, let's hit that reset button on what is his church supposed to be. You and me, the church, okay? So we're going to take a look at, right out of the gate, this passage. And so I'm going to be in Matthew tonight. So if you have your Bibles, go to that New Testament split and go to Matthew, okay? That's where we're going to be. And we're going to discover Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ. So take a look at this. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, hey, who do people say that I am, that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, the others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But then he said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. And I tell you that you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Did you know that this is the first ever mention of the church in all of the Bible? First time that it's ever mentioned, okay? And this is significant because not only what Jesus said about it, but where he says it. So up until this time, the disciples and Jesus for 3 years in their public ministry together have been roaming around Jerusalem and the Sea of Galilee. This is where Jesus told his parables. This is where Jesus would have walked on water. This is where Jesus turned water into wine. He miraculously fed thousands of people in this particular area. This is where he would soon go to be crucified on a cross around Jerusalem. But here we see that Jesus took a detour. And he went to Caesarea Philippi, which is 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. Why? Why would he do this? We're going to take a look at that. So you need to know this is about Caesarea Philippi. It was one of the most morally bent, spiritually confused, the most pagan of the cities at this time. And so it's situated at this base of Mount Hermon, where a massive cave housed a source of water, a largest spring that formed the beginning of the Jordan River. So here's a picture, just so you can kind of get from today what this place looked like, okay? So check this out. In many pagan religions, water is seen as the source of life. So one particular mythology that emerged in this place right here in Jesus' day was that this cave was where the fertility gods would come and go from the underworld. And if your offering was acceptable, they would emerge and give life to your family, to your crops, to your businesses. This cave, it sort of served as a gateway to appease all of these gods. And outside of that place, all kinds of corrupt behavior would take place. Let's just say that this was like the Las Vegas of Israel, okay? What happened here was, it's like Sin City, okay? Red light district kind of place. And this is not a place that a rabbi would hang out or any good Jewish person would go, okay? So this is really an interesting place that Jesus would take this detour and first bring up the idea of the church. So why? Why is it against this particular backdrop that Jesus first talks about the idea of church? What's he trying to show his disciples? What's he trying to show you and me tonight? So you know that throughout the history of the church, that perhaps no passage has ever been more debated than the one that we just read. Right? So when Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell," the Greek word there is actually Hades, "shall not prevail against it." Now, on one hand, you've got the Catholic faith who's taken that phrase to mean that Jesus was going to build his church on Peter, upon his leadership. But then you have on the other side, the Protestant faith took that phrase to mean that Jesus was going to build his church upon the confession that Peter made, that Jesus was the Son of the living God, right? And you can see both of them. I can see how this scripture would be both of those. So there's no denying that God would use Peter in the first early church, right? He's integral. If you read the book of Acts, he is integral to the start of the early church. And obviously, on the other hand, the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God means and still is about a healthy church. We base it all on Jesus, absolutely. I can see how both of these are true. But when I look here and I see where Jesus made this statement, there's actually a third meaning. I see it in here. When Jesus says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it," you realize he's standing in front of a literal rock in a cave called the gates of Hades. This is a big deal. I think it's significant, right? Don't you? That he's standing right there. So let me ask the question, why? Why there? Why this place? Why take a 25-mile field trip with your disciples to talk about rocks and hell? Now, okay, do you remember when you were in school, maybe you studied this, when you learned about this nature phenomenon known as the self-similarity principle? Anybody? Me neither, I had to study it as well, okay? So here's the thing, let me explain. Self-similarity is a set of patterns that look the same when viewed from no matter what size magnification. Even if you're way zoomed out, way out here, or if you look very closely, it all looks the same. So let me give you a couple examples so that you can understand what the self-similarity principle is all about. So if you were to break a branch off of a tree, and then you were to focus in on it, magnify it, it looks like a tree. Okay, so here's another example. If you were to take a small trickle of water that's coming down a little hill, and you were to zoom in and magnify it, it actually looks like a river that it will one day join. See what I'm talking about here? It's why the arm of a snowflake looks like, when you zoom in, a smaller snowflake. Okay, here's one of the coolest examples from nature. Take a look at this, okay? This is called Romanesco broccoli, okay? You can see that it has these cone shapes, but if you look closely, if you zoom in, each of the arms are also cone shaped. If you look closely at each of the arms, you'll see that they too are made up of similar cones. Look at this closer, right? Keep zooming in, and it continues to do this. It is self-similar all the way down. Now, on a much larger scale, let's just take our galaxy, and with the sun at its core, okay? With the planets, with the moon, and the stars kind of swirling around it. You find this same pattern in the tiniest of atoms, don't you? Right? You remember this from science class, right? It has a core, it has a nucleus, it has protons and neutrons swirling around it. You realize that God has built into all corners of his creation patterns. There's patterns that, when viewed from different magnifications, are meant to look and act similar. But it's not just in the physical world that these patterns exist. And some of you are wondering, where in the world is this going? So let's bring it to the reckless love of God that we've been studying. When it comes to his reckless love for us, he has put those same kind of patterns into place. God's intention has always been that if someone were to place his church, you and me, the people, the church, if you were to put his church under a magnifying glass, that you would see his reckless love. See what I'm talking about here? As weird as we can be, right? As weird as the church can be, as messy as the church can be, because we're filled with people, as frustrating as it can be, the church is supposed to be the self-similarity principle of God's reckless love for this world. The church is the self-similar principle. See, the church is God's way of taking his reckless love through his people and making it accessible for everyone in the world. This is why Jesus chose Caesarea Philippi, to launch the idea of the church into his disciples' hearts and minds. Why? Because for 3 years, they had been watching Jesus. He challenged the status quo on things like truth, on things like, what does it actually mean to love people well? He challenged the status quo on God himself. These disciples have had a front row seat of watching the kingdom of God be born, as their rabbi Jesus had led them into some of the darkest places of their world. So let me remind you of where Jesus took them, okay? So just some examples here. Jesus took them into the home of a little girl who died. Her parents were weeping, the entire community was mourning, and they watched as Jesus spoke, and it brought her back to life. Amazing. Another time, Jesus took them to the temple, where religion had replaced this reckless love, where the religious leaders, they brought a young lady out to Jesus, hoping that he would stone her to death. But by just speaking, each of those religious leaders put down their rocks, and he saved her life. He took them head on, right? They were seeing this in action. Another time, Jesus took these guys to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, where they encountered a man who was living in the tombs because he was demon-possessed. And Jesus set that man free as they watched him do it. Amazing stuff. So here, in Caesarea Philippi, nearing the end of Jesus' ministry, with his crucifixion coming shortly on the horizon, here's what he's doing. He turns to his disciples. He turns to you and me, and he says, now it's your turn. It's your turn. You see all these people who are operating in fear? They're trembling in worship before this dark place, this cave, the gates of Hades. Go get them. go love them in the same way that you've seen me love you and others. That's the why. Go get them. Go into these dark places of the world and bring light, bring hope, bring love, just as you've watched me do for the last 3 years. Now it's your turn. Jesus said it like this, recorded by John. He says, as the Father has sent me, so even I'm sending you. See, Jesus commissions these disciples to do and repeat what they saw him do, to be the self-similarity principle of his love in their world. And I just sort of imagine what's going on in the disciples' hearts and minds in this moment. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. He is expecting them to do what he did. In fact, not only that, he expected them to do more than he did. So after this powerful moment, it's recorded that Jesus shares these powerful words. Look at this. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I'm going to the Father. So don't miss that detail, right? I mean, it's huge, right? Jesus tells his disciples that not only will we be able to do what he did, but we'll be able to do greater works than Jesus did. So let me ask you a question tonight, everybody. If you're in the room and you are a Christian, you are a follower of Jesus Christ, does your experience as a Christian feel like you're doing as much as Jesus? Or even more than Jesus? And if we're honest with each other tonight, if we're honest with God, the obvious answer is no. None of us feel like that. Why? Because when we look at the reckless love of God, is it just me? I think all of our attention, it usually gravitates toward the big and the miraculous. We think miracles when we think about the reckless love of God. You know, giving blind sight, healing the lepers, turning water into wine. But we forget that some of the most powerful moments of his love was a simple word of kindness, was an encouraging word, being present with the people whom he loved. See, when we believe that the reckless love of God is only operating on the scale of the miraculous, what happens to you and me is that we doubt that God could actually use us, because we don't see that in our lives. As individuals, we have a tough time thinking that we could actually make an impact on this world because we can't pull off miracles. But here's the thing, did you know that Jesus' first followers, the disciples we read about, the ones who actually walked with him, the ones who witnessed his reckless love firsthand, did you know that they also struggled with doubt as well? Just like you and me? Right, we know the one famous guy. If you hang around church at all, you know his name, Doubting Thomas. We gave him a nickname, you know, but it's not just him. It's actually others as well. And I found it recorded here in Matthew's gospel in Matthew 28. So let me set this up. At this point, Jesus has already died. He was crucified on a cross. 3 days he was buried in the grave. And then he resurrected from the grave. He beat death. And so at this point, he comes to his disciples and he's giving them some final instructions before he leaves. And this is what he says, verse 19 and 20 of Matthew 28. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe or obey all that I've commanded you. And behold, I'm going to be with you always to the end of the age. Now, maybe if you've grown up in the church, you may have heard that before, but I doubt that you know the verses that came right before this. Okay, because those are kind of like famous church verses right there. Look at these ones. Look at this. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, the resurrected Jesus, they worshiped him. But look at this. Some doubted. And Jesus came to them and said, hey guys, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's a lot of authority, by the way. So here's Jesus, after his resurrection, giving his 11 closest disciples his final instructions, and as he's going up into the sky, the clouds kind of cover him. Some of them doubted. Them. They were like, go and make disciples. I'm not sure I'm still convinced. But what happened next is absolutely important. So please hear this. If you feel like you still doubt today, listen to this. The disciples had enough trust in Jesus to move forward in spite of their doubts. And do you know what they discovered when they did that? They discovered that if they did the smaller, the more simple things that Jesus had commanded them to do, that God could actually use them in very big ways if they obeyed those things. Sure, yeah, absolutely. We read about it in the book of Acts that some days for the early church where miracles were reported, absolutely, but that was only one magnification. If you read on further, you'll look that there were days upon days of rhythms where they were engaging with their neighbors and making sure that each other was cared for, that every need of the church and the people around them were taken care of. So let me ask you this question. If someone were to put your life under a magnifying glass, would they see the same reckless love that they see in Jesus? Now, for some of you, that might be a real challenge, just that question of no. But can I answer this for many of you in the room? See, I believe that for many of you in this room today, the answer to that question is an absolute yes. So let me encourage you, Northway. One of the reasons that I love this church is because many of you get it. You understand the mission that we're on, to be the reckless love of God to people. You get it. See, that's what drew me and my family here. Erica and I love this church. Our girls are being raised in this church alongside of you, many of you speaking into their life. I believe that there is no better church that I've ever been a part of than this one called Northway Christian Community, because so many of you have taken up the mantle of being the self-similarity principle of God's reckless love in the places where you live, where you work, and where you play. You have embraced the challenge of doing the greater things to love people extremely well. So I just want to show you what you're doing. So here's the thing. Reckless love is what has driven us as a church to pursue a deep partnership with Pastor Jean-Claude in Cap-Haïtien, Haiti. Just one of our short-term mission opportunities. Pastor Jean-Claude grew up as a young kid in Ebok Orphanage. And now in his 50s, he and his wife themselves, they have 13 adopted children. He also runs 2 different churches, a school, feeds dozens of people in his neighborhoods on a regular basis. And we as a church are sending one of our largest short-term mission teams to Cap-Haïtien in just a couple of weeks to support Jean-Claude and his work that he's doing there. Why? Because that's what reckless love does. You're doing it. Well done. See, reckless love is what prompted many of you Northway years ago to establish a professional counseling center right here on this property with highly educated counselors specializing in working with children and depression and anxiety, with marriages, with addictions. Why? Because that's what reckless love does. And reckless love is why we're going to do a fundraiser to support that counseling center. So come on out to Restore. It's a dinner and an auction that will raise funds to, why are we going to do this? To provide free counseling for people who can't afford it. And if you want to be a part of this and get in on this to raise funds for those who can't afford the counseling that they need, then come and be a part of this night. All the information is on our website. Why do we do this? Because that's what reckless love does. See, reckless love is why we have a fund here at Northway known as the Samaritan's Fund, to help our church members who are in times of financial crisis. Why? Because that's what reckless love does. We care for each other in times of need. Reckless love is why we pushed ourselves to launch our 6th campus last weekend, Beaver Valley. In an amazing, amazing launch. Can I just celebrate with you, church, that over 830 people came to be a part of Northway Beaver Valley last weekend. That is amazing, right? It's amazing to be a part of this. Why did we do that? Because that's what reckless love does. And you're a part of it. Thank you. See, reckless love is why nearly 30 of you last weekend, when we said we gave 200 plus people to Beaver Valley so that they could volunteer there, 30 of you said, yes, now it's my turn here at Wexford. Now here's the thing, I need 70 more of you. I'm serious. Why? Because that's what reckless love does. We take care of our own, and we reach out beyond these 4 walls. So 70 of you need to go out after this, and you need to sign up to be a part of our kids' ministry and our guest services. It's so easy to do. Why? This is what reckless love does. See, friends, I love being a part of this church. See, and as long as the church, you and me, is replicating the pattern of God's reckless love in this world, then the dark places, the gates of hell, will not prevail. And the church will continue to grow because God's in charge of it and we get to serve it. As long as the reckless love of God is shown to others through people like you and me, then orphans will find a home. Addicts will find recovery. The wounded will find healing. Your neighbors, your family, your coworkers will find hope. And that's what everybody is looking for. And you've got the answer. See, this often doesn't happen in these large sweeping miracles, but instead on this regular, steady rhythm of you and me showing the reckless love of God in the smaller details of our lives. See, I believe that's what Jesus meant when he said that we're going to do greater works than he did, even more than he did. I don't think that he meant that we would be daily raising people from the dead or providing lunch for our whole office with just one of our own Lunchables, right? I don't think that's what he was saying. Now, please hear me, because I can tell that some of you are thinking this right now. I am in no way dismissing the miraculous. I believe in miracles. What I'm saying is simply that the collective work of the church, you and me, over time, in the places where we live, work, and play, can be a much greater impact than even Jesus himself could. And those aren't my words. Those are his. See, here's the thing you need to hear. Jesus doesn't live in your neighborhood, but you do. So you need to go and serve your neighbor, help them out with yard work one day, and you never know that they might ask you for some help for something much more significant in their life. See, Jesus, he doesn't work in your office, but you do. So be compassionate to the people who are in your office day after day, and you never know, one day they may discover the compassion of God because of the way that you showed them love. See, friends, Jesus, he doesn't hang out where you hang out, but you do. So what if you took it upon yourself to be the chief encourager in the places where you hang out? What if you brought words of life to difficult situations that you hear going on? See, when we do these types of things in the places where we live, work, and play, I'm going to tell you what happens. The reckless love of God through the reckless love of his church can rip the gates of hell off their hinges. That's what we have the power to do. The question is, are we? The question is, do your neighbors have a perception of church and God because of you that doesn't match up with what it is that he's actually presented in the self-similarity principle? And that's a question for me as much as it is for you. By launching the idea of the church in Caesarea Philippi, Jesus removed all notion that his church was ever meant to be safe or comfortable or inward focused like a holy huddle. Jesus removed the notion that church is simply a building that we attend and we come to a few times a month. Jesus removed all notion that the work of the church was simply for pastors and the staff and for missionaries. No. What he gave us was a zoomed in picture of his reckless love, and he challenges us to be a reckless church, to live reckless with love as our weapon and the dark places as our battlefield. So are we doing it? So hear these words today, Northway Wexford. Jesus is turning to you right now. And he's saying, now it's your turn. It's your turn. Do you see all those people in your neighborhoods, in your offices, where you work, where you hang out? Go get them. Go love them with the same reckless love that God has for us.